Hi and welcome back to Philosophy with Phil, with me, Phil Cohen. This video is going to be on the Parsha, on Parshas Pikudei. This week's Sedra is Pikudei. And it's going to follow up on a previous video I did for Shalach L'cha that looked at Tznius. I think I called it the Tznius paradox. And we're going to, in some ways, follow on from that, but in some ways sort of go side by side with that. In some ways, I guess you could even say that this video kind of should precede that video. I just want two things. Firstly, to be clear that I hope the impression, if you do watch that video, and it probably would make sense to watch that video as to gain an understanding to this video, I perhaps left the impression that setting up walls and boundaries was not important. So I want to redress that balance, and I'm hoping that you'll see what I mean in a moment. A lot of what I'm going to be saying today, I don't do sort of book endorsements, but I do like to give you some idea of where I'm getting the ideas from. This book here, Doesn't Anyone Blush Anymore, by Rabbi Manis Friedman. I'll be honest and say I think it's out of print in the UK, but I'm pretty sure you can get it on Amazon. He's also done some videos on YouTube that you can watch talking about this as a theme. It's not just about what you think it is. It talks about relationships. It talks about abusive relationships and ways out of that, and all sorts of topics around the how we relate to each other kind of theme, particularly with people of the opposite gender. Right. Starts. I said for that video, that previous one on Shalach L'cha, that I do have sort of a handful of favourite rushes, and this is, again, in this week's Sedra, is another one of them. So we're told this is looking at Shemos, Exodus Lamed Ches, that's 38 verse 22. It's the second verse of this week's Sedra. Betzalel ben Uri ben Hur lamata Yehuda asa es kol asher asiva Hashem es Moshe. Betzalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, from the tribe of Judah, from the tribe of Yehuda, did all that God told Moshe. Let me just take a step back a moment, then we'll take a step forwards to remind ourselves of the chain of command here. When it came to the construction of the tabernacle, of the Mishkan, God told Moshe what to do, and Moshe told Betzalel and Aholiav and a few others what to do. And Betzalel was kind of like the project manager, architect, designer, and so on for that. But what this verse is telling us, and this is the question Rashi asks, is why does it say that Betzalel did what God told Moshe? Wouldn't it make more sense to say Betzalel did what Moshe told Betzalel? Hasn't he broken a chain of the command, of the communication channel? Rashi answers by quoting a Gemara from Brochas, 55a on the first side of the page. That's Nun Hay. And he said Betzalel and Moshe had a disagreement. And the disagreement was as to the order of building the things for the Mishkan. Moshe was saying that the ark and the other implements, the altar, the menorah, and so on, should be built first. And then build the walls and the coverings. But Betzalel said, no, ordinarily when you build a house, you build the walls first and then put the furniture in afterwards. You wouldn't go down to IKEA or whatever, buy your sofa, buy your dining room set, and then build the house around those. You do it the other way around. It's not, by the way, whilst we know that Moshe was almost transparent in the way he communicated the word of God through to the elders, through to the children of Israel, we see this in the changing in terminology, the difference that's used in the first Mishnah of Pirkei Avos, where we see the difference between the way Moshe communicates versus the way that the elders communicate, and you can look that up separately if you like. But Moshe has got form in changing the order of things. If we look, for example, in Exodus chapter 12, that's Shemos Yud Beis, we see that when God is telling Moshe how to apply the blood of the Paschal sacrifice to the doorposts, Moshe tells the elders a different way round of doing things. But what's going on here? One easy way of saying it is for Moshe, the focus of the whole of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was the ark. That was where the Shekhinah, the divine spirit, was due to rest. The whole point of the tabernacle was to be a housing place for the ark. Whereas Betzalel was looking at it from there's different ways of explaining Betzalel's point of view. Firstly, you wouldn't create the ark and then just park it somewhere whilst you make the walls and the rest of the tabernacle. That would be disrespectful to the ark. We have this in practical halacha, in practical Jewish law. If you're going to move a Sefer Torah from one place to another, it needs to have a definite place that it's going to, an ark, an aron, or some sort of a resting place. You can't just sort of take it somewhere, put it on a chair, and then put something together. There's got to be a reason for moving it, or a place for it to go. Likewise here, but Betzalel knew that we needed to create the walls first. And I want to explore that theme with the rest of this video. One direction I don't want to go down, and I'll leave it to you to think about and to explore, is the male-female aspect. We talked about this when we talked about the human psyche in Parshas Balak and so on. You can see Moses is represent very much the male aspect. He was always looking at tachlis, the outcome. What's the purpose of the exercise? That comes first. Whereas Betzalel, being his name meaning the shadow of God, he was more interested in the female aspect, the incubation, if you like. The walls, obviously representing a shadow that's cast, and he was tied in with the walls being more important for that reason. But as I say, I'll leave that to you to investigate. Walls coming first. When I studied biology, we one of the things we studied was cells. As you may know, all of our organs and tissues are made of individual cells. And one of the features of a cell is that it has a fatty membrane that surrounds it. And when we were learning about it, one of the functions of that membrane is simply to differentiate the environment within the cell from the extracellular environment, the environment outside of the cell. Because the constitution of the liquids inside and outside are different, and that difference needs to be maintained. But also the cell shape needs to be maintained, and it just physically defines what is in and outside the cell. That is a function of the cell membrane. It's fatty, it's waterproof, and it has channels in it that can control the molecules that go in and out, but its main function is there to differentiate inside from outside. In Judaism, we do that very much as well. Two examples I can give. Firstly, the first festival we celebrate, once we've had Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the first day we move on to is Sukkot, almost immediately after Yom Kippur. And on Sukkot, obviously, we're defining our relationship with God spatially in terms of walls and the covering, the sachach. We set boundaries. We say this is us, and outside is outside, and this is where we were going to exist for the next 7, 8, 9 days. The other example is in marriage. Marriage, although the ceremony is normally done in one big go, actually breaks down into two separate ceremonies. And that's why there's two separate sets of brachas under the chuppah. The first stage is Kiddushin, where the bride is designated as being the wife of the husband. And by that we mean that she is now forbidden to anyone else to marry. That would then be considered adultery. And she is so it's like a negative blocking off We're creating the space for the relationship. And then we go and consummate the marriage afterwards. So it's as if we're, again, creating the walls, defining our relationship, defining it negatively by saying what is not and forbidden to us. And then once we've created that space, working within that space within the best we can. What Rabbi Friedman says is that often in this world we are confronted by a lack of boundaries. Boundaries and walls are coming tumbling down. And by so doing we are being inundated with stimuli that in previous generations were just simply not there. If you just have to look back and you'll see how much of a sense of, he calls it modesty, but a sense of place everyone had. And that people, even common folk, knew that there was a place for things and everything had its place in society. Yes, that gave rise to a class structure and that kind of came tumbling down with the French Revolution, but that's besides the point. People knew that what was public and what was private, and the two never mixed. What we have now is because these boundaries are tumbling down time and time again, we get to a stage where you walk down the streets and you're being exposed to things, you're being exposed to pictures even, that in previous generations, it's been said that just by walking down one high street, you'll see more of more women or more women's flesh on billboards than the average peasant or farmer would have seen in their whole lifetime. And we're being exposed to these stimuli to such an extent that it's desensitizing us, to the point that when we need it in marriage, it's being dumbed down. We know the concept that if you're exposed to a stimulus repeatedly, you adjust to it, and it becomes less of a stimulus, and its effect wanes. We get that with sound, with smell. We get used to smells. We get used to sounds. We get used to sights. In the same way. And so we get to a stage where these stimuli cease to have an effect on us anymore. Jewish law has, for example, rules on what we call yichud, on the circumstances that arise, or the situations that arise when a man is in a room with a woman on his own. What are appropriate and what are not appropriate combinations for that to happen. The fact that we don't feel, the fact that the objections that are given to these rules is often said, well, you know, it's old-fashioned and it's for previous times, but the fact that it's considered to be obsolete in itself tells you something. Being alone with a woman in a room should be a highly sexually charged event, as he says. But yet, why isn't it? And what he says is we have natural instincts towards the opposite gender, particularly men for women. And those are perfectly natural, and yet they're being sullied. It is perfectly natural to be attracted to women. But modesty helps keep that back and rein us in. And that's been taken to all sorts of extremes. And there are two extremes I want to exclude right away. We are not saying for one moment that women that dress immodestly attract rape or whatever, and are justified if men make unwanted advances on them. We're not saying the other extreme, that women should dress up with completely covered up. But what we are saying is that there is a dignity, and that's the word I think I used last time in terms of Tznius. There is a dignity to the human being. And it is that we need to celebrate and be aware of. I'll end by saying that the wood of the walls of the tabernacle were made of what's called shittim wood, shittim tree. Shittim is related kabbalistically to the Hebrew word for shtus, which means folly. Madness and folly.